Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's going to be about human cryopreservation, of course. I'm running a cryopreservation organization together with Fernando and a couple of other people in Europe as kind of an alternative, potentially, to all the hopefully successful other approaches to living longer. I feel like when we talk about the longevity field, the field is kind of not split, but kind of in two parts, where some people are into health span, right? Everybody's into health span. I don't think there's anybody who would argue against health span. And then I would say a subset of those people are also into extending lifespan, actually living longer. Everybody who's into lifespan, at least that I've met, is also into health span. Not everybody who's into health span is also into lifespan. At least they don't say so. Maybe they do. In fact, I know a couple of people who publicly talk more about health span, but then are also into lifespan, right? We ran a large study a while ago when we asked people, okay, so even if you could live indefinitely, 26% shows indefinitely. And indefinitely arguably is very long, much longer than we currently realistically, of course, talk about. So there seems to be a good amount of interest also in the lifespan part. The problem, of course, everybody knows these curves. On lifespan, we have not made much progress. And in mice, we have. And the hope would, of course, now be that these kind of curves will sometime in the future also be possible for humans. My argument today would be that if we look at, this was a paper around 20 years ago, and it's the end of these longevity escape velocities ideas where, with medical intervention, hopefully at some point for every year that we live longer, we gain one additional year of remaining lifespan left, and then arguably the long-term plan could be that everybody can choose how long they would like to live in good health. The problem is 20 years ago, we're still at that curve there. Nothing has happened yet. We're still in the very beginning, right? And whenever I talk about cryopreservation, and then the argument is, cryopreservation is not a great plan. Everything that every other organization has talked about today before me, it's a better plan. It's a better value proposition. It's much easier to accept and so on. The problem is, it's also probably much more complex, at least in the time we have left. Not in principle, maybe, but in the amount of time we have left. And the problem is, what if we're wrong? What if we're all arguably reasonably young, but even I'm not convinced that I might not just be too old, right? Biology is just really, really, really hard. My first part of my career before doing these kinds of things and doing tech companies was cancer research. And the cancer field, every 10 years the cancer field says it's another 10 years. And they're doing that for many, many, many years, and they have way more funding than any of us and the whole field as a whole, right? So I'm hopeful. But my choice to go to cryopreservation was that I'm much rather this way around, that I'm wrong this way around, right? If in 20 years, any of you, or hopefully someone else, doesn't really matter, has found any life-extending drug, treatment, whatever it is, then I'm going to happily say that I was wrong. But I really want to make damn sure that I'm not 85 at some point, dying of something, and there's no longevity, and there's no good cryopreservation. Because we need to be open. Cryopreservation is really bad right now. It's probably better than being cremated or buried. At least I would always make that argument very, very strongly. But it's still bad. And the problem is, let's say even in 20 years, right, we have life-extending drugs. Maybe they work great. Every day, 180,000 people die, right? That's 67 million a year. For the next 10 years, that's 500 million people. Probably not all of those are okay with dying. Some people are, but other people would probably, if there would be any choice, would probably take that choice. So again, what if we're wrong? So I would strongly advocate for working more on backups. The only backup that I'm currently aware of is some type of preservation. Be it cryopreservation, be it chemical fixation, any type of preservation that, again, lots of downsides, but at least it can be done right now, right? So what is this cryopreservation thing? Some people might know, others might not, right? So the idea here is that at the time of death, that you cool down the body with specific so-called cryoprotective agents, just like you would, in principle at least, cryopreserve an egg cell or a sperm or other types of cells in the lab, and then you bring them back once you need them. Here in our case, of course, first of all, it's always much more difficult to do it with humans, but in principle you can cryopreserve whole organs. You can cryopreserve. I mean, Greg Fay, of course, can sing a lot of stories about it and tell stories. So you can technically do that with a human, and then the hope would be that in some point in the future, and it's very important to state, it's only a hope, right? We don't know how that might work and when that might work and even if that might work. But again, the alternative is cremation or burial. So I'm running we start running 3 organizations now. We're running Tomorrow Bio, which is like the operative organizations, has medical teams, mostly in Europe so far, but coming to the US as well. We're running a research institute run by a non-profit foundation that I founded a while ago that is running this research institute close to Zurich in Switzerland. And we're starting to fund more like really moonshot basic science with a couple of crypto people together in one of these DAO structures, stuff that would otherwise never be funded. That is even further out there, like really moonshots, even within the field of cryopreservation. So my challenge today would be work on more backups, right? If we're wrong with the assumption that all of this, longevity medication and treatments and whatever will work, health span is pretty easy. Extension of health span has been going on for many, many years, as we saw in these curves, right? So I'm pretty sure we're all going to be very healthy when we're dying with 85, or maybe it's 90. But if I can predict what I will want at 85, and I'm pretty confident that at 85 I would like to say, listen, quality of life is good because I think that we will be able to do. I would like to live another 20 years, maybe another 30, maybe another 50. And then at 45 years later, I would like to decide if I can do another 10. I think we're not yet on a good trajectory to make that happen. And I direly, direly hope that I'm wrong. But I'm down to work on the backups, and hopefully all of you can say in 20 years, you were the pessimist, we were right. I'm going to happily say that. Until that time, I'm taking any bet. If anybody wants to make any bet about extension of maximum lifespan, I'm probably taking that bet, even with very good odds. So if anybody wants to discuss this topic more, we have a few people come together tomorrow, having a dinner. If anybody wants to join, feel free to take the QR code or talk to us later and join. And now I'm, of course, more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
So I'm sorry for insulting the whole field here, but my sense is when you do cryopreservation today, it's as damaging as cremation, pretty much. I'm exaggerating slightly. What are the challenges of cryopreservation that you feel like your real challenges?
Yeah, so the list is tremendously long. So if the longevity field is underfunded, the cryopreservation field is 2 orders of magnitude more underfunded. It's a joke, right? I mean, directly working on human cryopreservation, it's probably a double-digit amount of millions a year, right? It's nothing. So it's from operational techniques to cryoprotective agents, not having toxicity, not having ice crystals form, figuring out quality metrics. All of it, there are initial parts, but there's a lot of discussions when we actually have someone who decided to have cryopreserved, wants to be cryopreserving themselves, right, with informed consent. So that's a very important part, right? Cryopreservation, I think, only is okay if there's informed consent. And informed consent means here, we don't know if it works. There's a long list. So whenever we then discuss, and I discuss with researchers in the field who've been around in the field long, and I say, hey, how should we do this? And then the answer is always, probably like this, but we don't actually know. No one has done these experiments. And that answer comes up, unfortunately, quite regularly. So the list is tremendously long. Yeah.
Are you guys also working on waking animals back up?
Not much. There is some research being done in that field, of course. But to be fair, that's probably far from realistic right now. Again, if you have double-digit millions of research funding per year in a whole field, that's less than one lab has in other fields, right? So the amount of stuff that can be done is unfortunately very, very funding limited. Hopefully we change that over the next years and decades. And if not, I tell my investors, if I sit around here with 3 people in 10 years, I'm still going to be there. And that's not the plan, but if need be, then so be it. But yeah.
We have another one with you.
So just to understand the intent, are you aiming for some kind of hibernation with continuity of consciousness, or is this just preserving neural architecture?
Yeah. The logic is, as long as the connectome is there, right, the connections and the weights, then for all intents and purposes, you're still there, right? And then arguably that could be, and of course now the caveat is that we don't exactly know how consciousness works and all of that, right? So it's possible that this would not work, but then again, I think it's a valid, educated guess under the assumption that the alternative is literally burial and cremation. But it would not be. Your consciousness would stop, and then arguably, just like in the past, at some point people said, when the heart stops, CPR is only around since the 1960s, right? Where the concept of what we think is unrecoverable death changed over time, and arguably not next 10 years, but maybe next 50 years, maybe next 100 years, maybe next 150 years, this concept would change again, and we will understand that is recoverable under certain circumstances.
Okay, we'll leave it at that, but please give me a challenge.
Work on more backups. No, why shouldn't we? I don't know. Something. Either it's a question. All right. What should we work on for extension of lifespan?